Hey everybody, this is Ryan E. Louie and this is the Digg Series. We are on episode 14. It's been a trip, and it's been a little while since I recorded my last episode here, so I thought that it being a little a propos, as in we just had auditions here at Medina for the 24-25 marching bees percussion line, and they just got their results. Also, this is kind of like a shout out. So the shout out goes to them, and the other one goes to the Wadsworth Marching Grizzlies as they're preparing for their audition later in May for the marching percussion line as well. So I thought it would be a good time to talk about auditions, maybe how to prepare for them, and some of my audition experiences, and see if it can be relatable to anybody that's listening. And maybe some people just don't even know like what it takes to not only audition for our high school groups here, but also for college and then into the professional world. Some of those experiences I would like to share. So I hope you find them interesting. So here we go. Anytime that there's an audition, period, it doesn't matter if it is in the orchestral world or in the marching world or in the drum set world or anything, I would always want to think that my hands or my chops are always at a state where they can be audition ready. And that's why I'm always practicing my rudiments. I'm always practicing my skills. On drum set, I'm always practicing grooves and feels and drum fills and different kinds of rhythmic permutations I can put on anything. And so anyway, for instance, if I'm preparing for a professional timpani audition, I'll just quickly talk about that, and we'll double back around to how to keep your hands ready and everything like that. But they ask for a one-page resume, and it kind of is your compilation of who you've studied with, who you've played with, what groups you're playing in. They take that one pager, and they'll get hundreds for an audition, and especially a principal timpani audition, because in a principal timpani audition, in a symphony orchestra, there's only one timpanist, right? And that's why you're the principal. You have an assistant for sure, but you're going to be asked to do the majority of the shows and the concerts. And so you send that one pager in, and they get hundreds. And they weed through all of that stuff. The last audition I took was Charlotte, and it was a number of years ago. Some auditions they accept. They call it a cattle call. Well, they'll invite 60 auditionees. But this one, they accepted 14. So I was one of the 14 that they accepted. You get accepted to the audition, so you get a letter back saying that you're accepted, and then they give you a repertoire list. And for principal timpani, it's all symphonic literature, right? Orchestral literature. This included a lot of like Mozart 39, Mozart 41, all the Beethovens, all the Brahms. These are symphonies. Tchaikovsky, all the way through Stravinsky and some Britten and some other stuff, Hindemith. And so they have excerpts. And so you kind of know, just through being on the circuit, what excerpts you need to prepare. You have that list that you can start preparing these symphonic excerpts on. And excerpts can be anywhere from 10 measures to 24 measures. And so that's really the bulk of your practicing, is just learning those excerpts. I was always taught, though, from my teachers, from wherever I went, that you actually learn the whole piece. So whether it be the first movement from Beethoven 1, well, I will know the whole first movement of Beethoven 1, even though the excerpt is a tiny excerpt and it could last, 16 measures. You still want to know what comes before it. You still want to know what becomes after that. And so that gives you a better sense of how you play. Now, professional timpani auditions come in rounds. So once you get accepted, you work it up your excerpts, you show up. So I showed up to Charlotte. They have a warm-up room that you go into, and they have different rounds that you do. So the first round is like where they would hear all 14 of us, one at a time. And then after that, if you make it into the semifinals, they weed it down to maybe three, four players, and then the final round will be like 2. And so as you go through these rounds, you'll play 7 of like the 30, 40 excerpts that you're presented, and each round would be a little bit different. So you're playing on timpani. Sometimes you have a choice of you can bring your own timpani, or they have timpani that are provided for you. And so I chose to play the timpani that were provided for me, and that ended up actually being a mistake to me. I should have just brought my own. And because I'm familiar with those, I can tune them the way I need to tune them. I'm familiar with everything like that. Anyway, so the first thing that popped up was Mozart 39. And I played through the excerpt and, not playing any note in the hall, because that's where and you're behind a screen. So, or the committee's behind a screen, so you actually can't see who they are. And it's just you by yourself. And so you go through, you play through your excerpts. For Mozart, for me, 39, I practice it at a certain dynamic volume because it's so early in the classical literature. I like to keep my volume down. So by the time I end playing something that's later through the Romantic into like 20th century, into 21st century, music that's composed, timpani is played different then. Instrumentation is different. And so, but the first note I hit it echoed so much, it was so resonant through the hall, I was already playing pretty loud. So then I had to gear everything off of that. And to be honest, I didn't even make it through the first round. And but my buddy did, Leo, who I went to Carnegie Mellon with, and he actually won the job. He went right after me, and he brought his own drums, and he sounded great. I listened to him, after, because I could hear him in the hall as I was hanging out with my friends that are on the circuit with me. And anyway, so the story goes is that I probably should have prepared a little bit harder, as in knowing what the hall sounds like, imaging what that would be more like. If it's a more resonant hall. I knew I was playing on a certain brand of timpani where they're Hinger timpani. And I know that I've played on Hingers before, but the casters, they move around a bit. So anyway, needless to say, that was one failed audition. I have failed many, many auditions, and I've certainly taken more auditions than I've won. And anyway, but prior to that, which is what I like to talk about, is like how I prepared for that audition. So how I prepared my excerpts, how I prepared my hands. So months before I knew that Charlotte was going to open up, and so probably 6 months in advance. So I knew an audition was going to pop up. So I would just play through not only my excerpts, but etude books. And so I would go through the Freese Lepac, the Goodman, all these different method books, and I would just read through them and get my timpani hands, in the best shape possible. Now, this is important because this goes across into like every part of the audition. So for instance, let's just say we have marching snare drum auditions coming up, or tenors or bass or marimba. In high school, we just had those, right? I talked about that earlier. If it were me auditioning, I would just want to make sure before I knew that let's say I want to audition for snare drum. I know if I'm going to audition for snare, then I'm not going to wait to practice until I get the excerpt, right? To practice that. I want my hands in the best marching shape possible. So that means I'm playing through different solos, through different books, and I'm sight reading more. And, so we're months in advance to even when our tech camps start. And so that my hands will be in the best possible shape. Also, though, you want to be able to learn the style that the drum line uses, just like with the orchestra. I knew the orchestra had a certain style. I knew that the timpanists before them, played more aggressively, so it allowed me to play a little bit more aggressively. The orchestra sounded the way that it did. So I knew that, orchestras play very, very differently. So like in New York, you could play a certain style. In Cleveland here, the Clevelanders play a certain style, and the person that's playing right now is a Clevelander player. And so obviously because we live in Cleveland, but we play that style that we were taught. And I was just taught by a Clevelander timpanist whose name was Cloyd Duff. He'd retired from the symphony, and when I was back in Utah, I would study with him because he would live in Arizona or Colorado, depending on winter or the summer. And that's who I studied with. So oddly enough, not even knowing that I would end up here in Cleveland or close to Cleveland, right? But that, I already learned that style. But that's the style that was winning the most auditions in the United States, were those proteges of Cloyd Duff. And even from the 80s and through the 90s, Duff players were winning all across the nation. And so, when in Rome, so to speak, right, I went with that style. So getting back to like an audition, like for a high school thing, if you know that we play a certain style, I'm going to learn it. And so it would be the legato technique. And I would want to learn everything that I can about the legato technique. So in my lessons, I would be asking, so what is this legato technique? How do I play it? How do I practice it? What do I need to do so that come audition time, that I'm able to be the best player that I can be. I would go through, like I said before, I would read through the Wilcoxons. I'd read through the Pratts. I would do a solo for solo and ensemble. I would do it at a recital. My teacher had a recital, which I do have a recital. So everybody, most people that end up playing on the recital end up playing well at solo and ensemble, and they're playing on that instrument that they're going to audition for. So we're talking months and months in advance. We're already thinking about this next audition, which happens in May. So in the summer, which is now, right, we start working on solos. But while we're working on the solos, we're learning the technique that we play. And the same thing that goes with mallets. So if I know that like our front ensemble uses 4 mallets and I wanted to play 4 mallets, I would certainly then learn how to play 4 mallets well in advance so that I'm not cramming technique and music and trying to, get familiar with the keyboards, right? The marimbas on there. So by the time I get to the audition, I'm already seasoned as a player. And so like my chops, and they're already in great shape so that when I get the excerpt, it's really not that hard to learn because then it's just reading the notes. Right, I've already been reading. I've already gone through, tons of sight reading. I've gone through tons of working on solos, that challenge your musicality, that challenge your technique, so that, honestly, by the time you get your excerpt, you have more than enough hands to be able to play that excerpt. I think if you do those things, you usually set yourself up for success in an audition. And because it takes months and months and months prior to the audition of preparation, so that by the time you audition, all the audition material becomes relatively fairly easy because you've done the hard work months and months and months in advance so that, the audition becomes easy. Then it's just a mental game of making sure that you can perform that the way that you practiced. We had talked about in some of the early episodes about the mental game of playing. I'm going to just really review real quick about imagery. Imagery is so important. Imagery comes in 2 different forms for me. Like if I'm learning a snare excerpt, I can like close my eyes and I could see my snare drum and I could imagine it, just using my imagination, right? Imagery, playing through the solo, note by note by note. Whether it's high or it's low, whether it's accents or a tap. If I have dynamics, I have all of that. I go through it note by note, and I can see my snare drum. I can see it right now. So my hands are in snare position. I'm just playing. I'm airplaying this, but I'm imaging me playing on a snare drum, and I can hear it inside my head. Same thing that goes with mallets. Note by note, placement at every single note as you go through, right? And so I can form my 4 mallets in my head, but my fingers are shaped like, 4 mallets here, and I could go through note by note by note. That mental part about imagery is so important because if you can see it in your head, that way it's like practice away from your instrument. And we're not around our instrument all the time. And so that is a great way. The other part of imagery is where you actually image walking into the room that you're going to audition in, and that you can image the committee members that are on the audition committee. And, as we prepare, we knew that there are going to be 5 or 6 people there, and I would image them, and then I would go through the process in my head, what the room looked like, what the concert hall looked like, what it sounded like, what my instrument would sound like. I'm just imaging all of this. And so that when I get there to the audition, I'm able to walk in there and I'm already familiar with the place. I.e., when I was in Charlotte, I was not that familiar with the hall. I was not incredibly familiar with the heads that were on the timpani. I probably could have done some more research and know that the hall was a really live hall. So you can do that all in your head. Because by the time, you get to playing an excerpt, whether it be on whatever instrument that you're auditioning on, you should have played it hundreds of times. So it's not like you haven't played it before. So then it is you need to be able to get into that mindset of playing it just like you practiced. Also, in preparation for an audition, I will make sure that I play in front of people before I do that. So if I'm only playing in my basement or in my studio and I'm not playing for anybody, sometimes when you get in front of playing in front of somebody, it can be a little bit scary and nervous. But I try and get all that out of the way. It's not like I'm not going to be nervous before I step in for the audition. Of course, fight or flight goes in. You become nervous. Your hands, your heart can pound faster. All these things can all take effect. And, talking to you folks, that are listening to this, I'm sure you've gone through this. You get into the place and everything starts to cook. So now becomes the true mental game of like how to get rid of that fight or flight so that you're able to be a little more calm, a little more focused, so that you can play your excerpt, which only lasts, 20 seconds at the very most, right? Just like you practiced again and again and again with no mistakes. And, that is a great way to practice. I'm just going to share one last story on one of my auditions. I was auditioning for the Sioux City Symphony. I was already in the Air Force Band, but I thought I would take this audition. And so I step in there. They had sent me the list, and it was kind of an obscure list. I had American in Paris by Gershwin, but it had all the regulars. But the odd part about it, it asked for a timpani sonata. Now, there aren't a ton of timpani sonatas that are composed right for timpani. For violin, there are. For trumpet, for flute, for cello, for bass, there are all these sonatas that are written, right? Whether it be by Bach or by, whatever. Anyway, but for us, there aren't a lot. So it wasn't like the most educated, to me, audition. But I prepared a Sonata for Timpani by John Beck, and I was going to do the first movement. I brought music, and so that I could give to the committee. I get in there. And actually, they were holding two auditions. They were holding principal timpani and principal percussionist. I said, I'd like to audition for principal timpani. They're like, well, don't you want to audition for percussion? I said, no, I just want to audition for timpani. Well, why don't you want to audition for both? It's because I'm a timpanist. I'm just here to audition for timpani. They said, okay. So I step in there. There's this big, thick curtain that's in front of the timpani, like a stage curtain, like a red curtain. I remember it specifically. And I went to the monitor and I said, I have music to play or to give to the committee. And he's like, oh, we don't need it. They just want to hear you play. And so I go, okay. And so anyway, I end up, playing the first half of the Sonata for Timpani by John Beck. And I just thought, it goes into like this real kind of esoterical section where you're playing on the bowls and all this kind of stuff. I don't know if they wanted to hear that. I just thought, you know what? I'm just going to make up the rest of it, which is unheard of in a classical timpani audition. But I did it anyway. And so I did it. And I just remember I was just playing, exciting stuff, what sounds cool. Then I just ended like bum, 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 and then bum, bum, bum. And the monitor is the helper. He goes, yeah, that was awesome. And, anyway, which I just thought is one of the craziest things in an audition I've ever done. The other part that struck me odd about that audition, so then I went and played through the list. And I'm backstage or in the green room where all the other auditionees are in. And I had one person, and he has his doctorate in music, and he's a percussionist. And he comes up to me and he goes, hey, none of these excerpts have tempo markings. How do you know what tempo to play? And I'm like, well, on this, it says allegro con moto. That is, you don't, he goes, well, yeah, I just didn't know. Should it be this fast or this fast? And obviously he never did his score study. No score study whatsoever. And that's listening to recordings, going over the score, so you know what's right, you know what's wrong. And another guy comes running in, and he is a professor of percussion at a university. Comes running in, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so late." I'm like, "Well, you're on." So he goes out there, and one of the excerpts was the Benjamin Britten's Orchestra Guide to the Percussion, and it has this timpani excerpt that is like bugga-da-dum, bum bum, bugga-da-dum, bum bum. Bum 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 bum. Anyway, it goes on and on and on. Like, he runs out on stage, and he didn't tune his drums. He didn't tune the timpani, and he just played. And then he went through the whole rest of the audition just completely just frazzled. And he comes back in. He's like, I just failed. You go, oh my gosh, what do you say to that? That was by far. I ended up winning the Sioux City Symphony audition, and but it was by far the craziest audition that I've been to. And so all I could say in summary and wrapping up all of this is that when you audition, you can prepare months and months and months, and it doesn't matter if you're in like high school or college or even middle school. You get your hands, your chops in shape, and you get them so that when they're in such good shape of playing whatever instrument you're going to audition on, that the excerpts are very, very easy. So I'm going to leave you with that. Please don't hesitate to contact me, to comment me, comment to the podcast. I know it's been a little while since I recorded my last, so I hope that you liked this one, and I will see you on the next one of the Digg Series. Peace and truth and love.